at a midway point here in the week where more and more people are locally, anyways. We head into Memorial Day weekend, and we're going to talk about the meaning of Memorial Day and those who gave all. But the weather, people are beginning to talk about. Hey, have you heard the weather forecast the next few days? Going to be a dandy. Going to be a dandy, a real nor'easter. We tend to think of nor'easters during the winter, but a nor'easter, strong winds, some heavy rain expected tomorrow into Friday, and a little bit cloudy into Saturday. Sorry, it's not the best way to begin Memorial Day weekend, but we'll try and make the best of it. I know John Ritchie, Ritchie Construction over there in Newington, has a big sail on top of his building. He's trying to measure the wind, but we'll have a good one no matter what. But hey, good morning, New Hampshire. Good morning, right up into Maine. We're going to talk about the state of Maine quite a bit in a moment because Paul Steinhauser with Fox News National joining us in a moment live out of the gate. And of course, he reports for Fox and a New Hampshire resident. Good morning, New Hampshire, the Pulse of an H. He'll tell you what our poll question up on X is in a moment at the Pulse of an H. But hey, New England, worldwide, hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play the Pulse of an H. In addition to our great network of AM and FM stations, we have a new FM signal fired up. Seacoast in New Hampshire, up in Maine, 98.7 FM and HD2, in addition to our flagship networks. Lakes region, we've added a signal there as well beyond Laconia, AM and FM, WEMJ. We have 98.3 FM cranking up on the lakes, if you will. That also can be HD2. So we got a busy Wednesday for you. And, this is pretty cool, J-Dog. In a little bit, we are going to be speaking with someone live right here on Good Morning New Hampshire. Jack, Heath, J-Dog on the board. Someone who knows the Pope, the new Pope, Pope Leo the 14th, quite well. Former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See under the G.W. Bush administration, and he wrote a book. He wrote a book about the global Vatican, and he knows Pope Leo the 14th quite well. And he watched the conclave process and the election of the new pontiff. And we're going to be hearing from former Ambassador Francis Rooney live in a few moments. But Paul Steinhauser out of the gate talking about the state of Maine. Paul. Mm-hmm. And LePage was kind of Trump before Trump. I mean, he had that unplugged style. It drove the liberal side of Maine nuts when he was governor. He's quite a character. Business background. The other one is the governor's race. And I mean, it does appear that there's a Republican, speaking of former President George W. Bush, but there's a Republican, I don't know his name offhand, that seems to be more kind of the first, I think, electable for independents in Maine Republican who's run for quite some time. And of course, Janet Mills, at some point, she's not going to run for the Senate, the Susan Collins that is now holding. So that Maine, the governor's race will be interesting there as well. Yeah. What What's the buzz in Washington, Paul, on the U.S. Senate potential matchup or open seat with Jeanne Shaheen moving on? The U.S. Senate race. Obviously Chris Pappas really freezing the field for Democrats. What's the buzz in Washington about this? Anything? Thank you, Paul Steinhauser, nationally for Fox. Good morning, New Hampshire, the Pulse of an Age. Thank you, Steiny. I want to stay with the state of Maine for a moment. So I saw it's interesting sometimes. You've heard if you've been a regular listener on my show, and I thank you very much for that and appreciate it. I mean that we do, and our sponsors and advertisers, and it really takes you and the listeners. I mean, the advertisers, the sponsors, the businesses, and the listeners, or you don't have a show. So thank you. But you've heard me say over the years, I think with all the confusion and the political divisiveness and the nastiness, and how so much of things just get sort of stuck, and people have a political point of view and opinion, and if yours doesn't match theirs, they'll start the name calling and screaming and throwing objects at your head because you don't align with them or whatever. But anyway, you've heard me say that I often think that if you want to really, really, truly understand someone's politics, I mean this sincerely, talk about taxation and taxes, because it really will explain the difference between liberal thinkers and more conservative fiscal thinkers. And I mean this sincerely. I mean, even right here in New Hampshire, we're trying to balance the state, the legislature, Governor Ayotte. They're trying to balance a budget with no real new taxes, no income tax, no sales tax. And when the legislature previously under Governor Sununu, let the dividends and interest tax sunset, in other words, go away. And if you remember during the election with Joyce Craig and Kelly Ayotte for governor, I asked one of the top Democrat thinkers, because justify why you think it's a mistake, and why does Joyce Craig want to bring back a dividends and interest tax? Why would you run for governor before you get elected and talk about bringing in a new tax if elected? That's just, voters they don't like talking about new taxes. And if you want to get elected and then you have a shortfall, maybe you bring it up once you're in there, but why would you run on it? And what people say on taxation, if you're on the liberal side of things, is Republicans just want to give the rich tax cuts. So this, every time that you bring up taxes, the liberal thinker will say, well, they cut taxes to help the rich, even though a lot of average people on their retirement accounts who are by far rich would have paid a dividends and interest tax on any stock or 401k stuff. But the point is, it's always these terms of the rich and middle class are thrown around like ping pong balls. But let's really look at the state of Maine for a minute. Coming back to the state of Maine, Paul was talking about the congressional races. So looking at taxation as a real barometer of a state, how do the 50 states rank by tax burden? And the reason why I like this particular study, and I put it on my social media page for the show, this is from a group that just like Wallet Hub. They just look at all the taxes on the table, and then they look at the burden to the taxpayers of a state. So it would not surprise you, but you should know this and not take it for granted. In the last week alone, New Hampshire's gotten 2 distinctions. Second best state to live in. Second, the safest state behind Utah to live in the country. Third friendliest state for veterans in the country. And number 49 out of 50. 49 out of 50 at the bottom of the ladder for the lowest overall tax burden is New Hampshire. That's right. Number 49. And speaking of liberals versus conservative thinkers, you'll always hear, oh, but we have these huge property taxes in New Hampshire. Now, I'll concede that property taxes in some communities are high and probably too high, but that's up to the local voters. No income tax, no sales tax. 49th out of 50, lowest tax burden in the country. Next to last is New Hampshire. Maine is right up at the top, right up there with all the other overtaxed states, right up near the top. And what makes it worse, the study points out Maine. So when you talk with people about liberal thinking, they'll tell you New Hampshire needs an income tax. We need a sales tax to lower property taxes. Whenever anyone tells you we need a new tax to lower another one, well, that's like having a migraine headache and someone saying, I'm going to hit your knee with a hammer so your head doesn't hurt as much. You don't bring in one tax to lower another. The taxes never come down. But property taxes in New Hampshire, the overall tax burden where property taxes are included with other taxes in New Hampshire, by the way, Um, we have the next to last, the most enviable lowest tax burden next to last in the country. Maine is right up there with the highest. Listen to this. Maine has the highest property tax burden in the country. Alabama has the lowest, just property taxes. California has the highest overall individual tax, income tax. But Maine, it's New York, Hawaii, Vermont, Maine, number 4 on the most tax burden state in the country. Maine, total tax burden, the number they give it almost 11%, the state of Maine. New York, the state of New York, 12%. Hawaii, number 2. Vermont, number 3. Okay, got to love old socialist Vermont, Bernie. 11.12%. Their highest bracket of income tax in Vermont, I think, is 11. Maine's at almost 11%. California, how about this, Maine? I wonder if Governor Janet Mills is proud of this one. Governor Mills, are you proud that in this independent study of tax burden, you actually beat California? Groovy Newsom, you beat Gavin Newsom in California. Maine is number 4, ahead of California and Connecticut, which is a terribly taxed state. Maine is almost 11, California 10.4, Connecticut 10.8. So Maine's number 4 of the highest tax burden, number 4, one of the highest tax burden states in the country. How's that working for you up there in Maine? And then you look at New Hampshire's percentage. Our overall tax burden is 5.63%. And by the way, all you people that think that you're going to lower property taxes with an income tax in New Hampshire, not happening. That 5.63% includes the property tax burden in New Hampshire. So New Hampshire is about half of the tax burden of the state of Maine. Here's a question for you before I go to break. How is it a state with about the same population, 1.3 million, about the same in New Hampshire, 1.3 million, give or take, probably a little more. We have one of the lowest tax burdens of any state in the country. Maine's ahead of California. They have the highest. Maine has the distinction in this study of the highest tax burden, of property tax burden of any state in the country per capita. And last time I checked, they have a big fat income tax in Maine and a sales tax, highest property tax burden in the state of Maine. So tell me, how is that working for you? How is that working for you in the state of Maine? How is it New Hampshire is able to survive in this day and age with one of the lowest tax burdens in the country, no income or sales tax? And just this last week alone, we get ranked one of the top best quality of life states to live in the country. Maine didn't get any of those rankings last week. Maine didn't get them. Maine didn't get the third friendliest state to live in for veterans, the second safest state, the best overall state to live in the country. New Hampshire, with a 5.6% overall tax burden, got all those distinctions last week, and we have no sales or income tax. How is it, Governor Mills and the state of Maine and all the liberal legislators in Augusta, how is it that happens? You have an income and a sales tax, highest tax burden for property taxes in the country in Maine, and you have an income tax. How is it? I'm just wondering. It doesn't add up, or does it? Commentary. Hey, we're going to check in with someone who knows the new pontiff, actually very close with him. We're going to talk with a former ambassador of the Holy See and author of a book, The Global Vatican, Ambassador Francis Roney, on deck next. Welcome back on this Wednesday. And of course, up our new signal strength up into Maine, New England. Good morning, New England. Good morning, New Hampshire. Good morning, worldwide. Hey, Alexa. Hey, Google, play the pulse of an age. Thousands of you listening. We have some folks that are traveling in Europe now from Portsmouth listening to there, I guess, at some cafe in the afternoon, probably having something maybe that resembles a glass of wine somewhere. But thanks for listening out there. Actually, they're in Poland. I didn't realize that. Good morning. Hey, speaking of global stuff, I'm really excited and pleased to have our next guest. He's former U.S. Ambassador Francis Rooney, and he was ambassador under the President George W. Bush administration to the Holy See. He's written a book, The Global Vatican, and I believe he's rather close with the new pontiff, Pope Leo the 14th, and watched the process, at least like we all did, of the conclave form and elect a new pope. Ambassador, thanks for being with us. Oh, I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the call-in chamber. Well, Ambassador, talk about the new pontiff, the process, and are you pleased with the process of the new pope? And just tell us your thoughts. Just tell us a little bit about your background and your time as ambassador to the Holy See. Well, Ambassador Rooney, Pope Leo the 14th, first American Pope, Chicago, Illinois. I thought it was great after the election of the Pope. His brothers were, I think, rather, it was just human to watch their reaction of their brother and some of the stories they shared. I thought it was nice. Uh, but obviously, your book, The Global Vatican, Pope Leo the 14th has a global role, leader of the Catholic Church, global, regardless if he's from America or a different part of the world. Um, is that hard sometimes for a pontiff to balance that, or do you think he already? I know he had spent time in another country. Do you think he was already kind of global in his outlook? And when you become a pontiff, because I don't know the process as intimately as you do, are you thinking beyond your own life and your background and where you're from at some point, if you're even considered by the cardinals to be pope? Interesting. Now, Ambassador Roni, what is the Augustinian organization? Explain what Pope Leo ran there. I don't know much about that. I've been to St. Augustine, ironically, one of the first, I think it was 1560 something. If you go to St. Augustine, Florida, you can see the first signs of a church and all that. But what is that order? How does that go on the religious scale of, philosophy and all that? What's it like, Ambassador Rooney and I? We've seen, New Hampshire. Dan Brown wrote about the Da Vinci Code and Tom Hanks, and there've been the conclave. Ironically, in fact, I love the fact that one of Pope Leo the 14th's brothers spoke to him a few nights before the conclave and asked him if he had watched the movie. And I guess they were playing word games, and he said, "Did you watch the movie?" And I'm paraphrasing, and he said to his brother, soon to be Pope, "Well, maybe you should watch it so you know how to behave, so you don't embarrass the family." I thought that was hilarious. But we've seen the books, but I've never been to the Vatican, and I've never had an audience or been able to meet or greet a pope. And I'm just curious. You said you worked with Pope Benedict so often. Just what is that feeling and experience like? I mean, I've sat with presidents, I've interviewed 2 or 3 sitting presidents in the Oval Office, and there's a process there, but they're not the Pope. What's that process like, Ambassador? Interesting. Now, Pope Leo the 14th, before we let you go, I'm just curious, have you had a chance to communicate with him at all since he's become pontiff? Because I read about in one of the stories about you that you're close to him. Does he have a sense of humor? Just curious. And have you had a chance to communicate at all with him since he was elected pope by the cardinals? Yeah. One last thing, Ambassador Francis Rooney, and the book, I guess, The Global Vatican, correct? Even without some tariffs. Hey, Ambassador, where's home to you now in the United where do you live? I'm just curious. Okay, my last question is this. I was thinking this because you mentioned head of state, ambassador, former ambassador to the Holy See. And you know what struck me when they that evening when it was clear that the white smoke had come out and that they had reached that the Cardinals had elected a new pope, and he appeared, and what amazed me was how naturally and calmly he spoke in Italian, Spanish, and I think even some Latin. Amazing, to sort of send a message of, I guess, the world. But, what yeah, and but the one thing that was interesting to me is I was thinking about this in terms of Pope Francis in the end and, his health. You mentioned head of state. When you've been a president or a leader of a country, certainly a president of the United States, you do have a former life, even if you do have Secret Service and, you gotta be protected, but the point is you can somewhat like you mentioned George W. Bush, for the most part, other than Kennebunkport, Maine, I think he's back in Texas, enjoying the library. I know Andy Card, former chief of staff, you probably know Andy, his brother's a regular on my show. He's probably, George W. Bush, former president. Yeah, so I think he's kinda you're still always former president, but the pope, once you're pope, no matter what, whatever life you had or knew before, it's over. I mean, you're never not pope, till the end. You think about that. Is that true? Yeah. I mean, how do you ever not be the pope? All right, listen, I love it, and the book. the Global Vatican enjoyed Naples. Thank you, Ambassador Rooney. All right. Hey Google, hey Alexa, by the pulse of an age. It's kind of a, I think, a fascinating look at the new pontiff and Pope Leo the 14th, and I think pretty much everything Ambassador Rooney said because he had known him before in terms of his roles before the Cardinals elected him. I think pretty much is in line with the perception. I don't know about you that I've been able to see or feel. Hey Google, hey Alexa, by the pulse of an age. We'll tell you about Jake Tapper's book and the New Hampshire presidential primary and why Joe Biden didn't run here. Back in a moment. We'll probably share more of my interview with Ambassador Rooney, former ambassador to the Holy See, talking about Pope Leo the 14th in a very personal, up close way. Fascinating discussion with him. Of course, he had worked more with Pope Benedict, but we appreciate him being on. John Decker, our own White House correspondent. Sorry to keep you, John, real quick. The ambassador went long, but when he's talking about the Pope, I guess would yield. Golden Dome, a golden dome over America might take 3 years, but I think it makes a lot of sense when you look at how it saved Israel more than once. Take it away, John. Interesting, but big ideas. I don't want you don't get political. You're a correspondent. You cover the White House, but it's interesting. I saw one story yesterday. I think a leading Democrat strategist said, the Democrats going forward need more in their arsenal than just anti-Trump rhetoric. Say what you want, but look at the ideas. Whether it was the Middle Eastern trip, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Dubai, whether it's the Golden Dome. I know all this seems, kind of whatever, but these are big ideas. Even if they get executed, or not, they're big ideas. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Uh, yeah, we had Marco Rubio's former chief at a podcast this week, and I said only President Trump can call it a big, beautiful bill. But real quick, I think it will come down to the economy. Do you think this will get through in some form or not? I guess they're trying to appease the blue state senators, but do you think in the end enough of this will pass, or do you think it's going to be a tough one? All right, thank you, John Decker. Great stuff. John Decker, our own White House correspondent. So I want to tee this one up, and I really want to try and penetrate some open mind thinking on something, and I mean this. For all of you out there, try and look at sometimes through the rhetoric, through the sound bites and the spin, and try and look at some of the hypocrisy. Try and look at the hypocrisy. And I'm looking at Jake Tapper's book, The Excerpts. Jake Tapper. And a lot of people are talking about it. And I don't know if 60 Minutes and some of the networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, are going to start asking more questions. But look at what Jake Tapper, no Trump guy, obviously. And I love it how he was complicit in a lot of this. But Jake Tapper has done sort of a tell all book behind the Joe Biden curtain, the reelection, all this stuff. But let's go back to New Hampshire, folks. Let's come back right here. All things local, all politics local, and maybe loco. Let me ask you a quiz question. What party, the Democrat or Republican Party, talks so much about open elections, voting, democracy? They don't even want you to show your driver's license. They think that's an infringement or an obstacle to vote. What party talks about all that? Oh, that'd be the Democrat Party. Jake Tapper's book, and this is not a Trump book, Jake Tapper's book on Joe Biden, just what we thought. When his reelection was coming around, a small circle, and Tapper's identified 3 top advisors in and around Joe Biden, grabbed and seized power, and had this plan. This is Jake Tapper, not me, to basically manipulate and try and muscle his reelection, knowing of his physical and mental health decline. This is unbelievable. So you take advantage of someone who may not even have all their faculties. We're going to do this to get him elected, and we'll worry about him falling down or stumbling down later. This is before any cancer or prostate news of this weekend. The 3 people around him, and I always said, who's running the White House? How many times have you heard me say that over the last 3 or 4 years? Who is running the White House? These 3 or 4 advisors come up with this plan to not have Joe Biden have to run in any of those early primary states or contests like Iowa or New Hampshire. But this is how cunning and diabolical these 3 are. So they basically, because they run the DNC, they tell the whole 50 states, we're going to change. Does this ring a bell, folks? This last time, we're going to change the primary calendar And we're not going to respect the early contest like New Hampshire's first in the nation presidential primary. This is the Biden White House DNC. We're going to screw over, and they took the primary away this last time, if you remember. Joe Biden's not going to go up and run in New Hampshire. Now, the real reason was because he physically and mentally, we would see the decline. So they hid that from us. This is Jake Tapper's book, not Jack Heath. This is Jake Tapper. Okay. And the reason they use with the media, which was complicit in this, the national media and everyone else, was race. In Jake Tapper's book, they said, you know what? We'll BS everyone and tell them it's because of race. New Hampshire is too white. It's because of race. Joe Biden's not going to go up there and run. We'll start this thing in South Carolina because of race. And the real reason was his mental health and physical decline because of race. So they anoint him. And listen to this. They anoint him. And then in the summer, they take his nomination away and give it to Harris with no one voting on it at the convention. So the party that talks about elections, democracy, and voting, they don't want you to vote. You, the Democrats and independents, they don't want you to even vote on their own candidates. And they use race as an excuse in New Hampshire, which I think is disgusting. It's disgusting. The party that talks about it, and they wonder why they lost, they use race as a reason to cover up the president's health. And then they anoint Kamala Harris without any other people having a chance to be on that ballot in Chicago. So I have two questions for you. That's Jake Tapper's book, but one of it on New Hampshire's primary. Where was the outcry of Democrats in New Hampshire at the time when the primary was taken away and race was used as an excuse for New Hampshire? And in all due respect, where, and I had Jean Shaheen on the show Friday, and I asked her, U.S. Senator Jean Shaheen, she said now she has regrets, but where were the leading Democrats in New Hampshire when this crap was being pulled by three advisors around the president? Kind of like a Politburo is how Jake Tapper put it, coup to take power, using race as a reason. Where was Ray Buckley, Chris Pappas, at the time, Annie Custer, Senator Maggie Hassan, and Senator Sheen? Where was the collective outrage? We are not a racist state. I didn't hear one of them say press conference. Where were they together saying, you are not going to take away our primary? Joe Biden is going to run here. Where was the outcry? Where was the speaking up when this was happening? And then second question I have is, who are these three advisors? Tapper's identified them. Where is 60 Minutes? Are they so obsessed with doing another anti-Trump piece on the Golden Dome Sunday night? Would they really do a news story? Who were these three mystery advisors that America doesn't even know their name that took over the puppet shadow government of the Biden White House in the election? Who are they? Open borders. Biden, as President Trump now says, he was never in favor of that. They basically hijacked the southern border, hid his health. Who are they? And why is the media not going and asking them questions? Why did you do this? Sit down with Jill Biden and ask her, did you know this was happening? Oh, and then Jake Tapper said it was so bad, these diabolical few. You listen to this, because I wondered this myself. They controlled and did not allow cabinet members to directly meet with the president of the United States. So if you're Secretary of State or Defense, I can't go in and talk to the president and make an appointment and say, I have some concerns about the Middle East. I have some concerns about Syria. They didn't want you direct. You had to meet with someone else, like maybe Jake Sullivan from New Hampshire, National Security Advisor, and Secretary of State Blinken. These are all smart people. They were denied access to the president to hide his health. Who are these people behind the curtain? And why was this allowed to happen? They basically hijacked the Biden White House. And we're okay with that? And you're a leading Democrat and you're okay with that? And then you lie about using race in New Hampshire as a reason not to run in the primary here? You're okay with that? Talk about hypocrisy on steroids. Hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play The Pulse of an Age. Back in a moment. The auto pen. You've heard about that, and you probably went, who cares? Auto pen. What was President Trump at Caroline Leavitt referring to a month ago and talking about the auto pen? They re- they smartly realized that even the pardons that Biden did on the way out of all the criminals, remember those pardons the last couple of days? Again, people forget this stuff because I guess it didn't fit the narrative. What Biden could do whatever he wanted. Auto pen signatures versus original. Who had the auto pen? Now that may sound juvenile and simplistic, but it's a pretty important question. Scary. Movies have been made about this, by the way. Imagine if someone other than the president was running the United States of America. Now, why does this matter, folks? Why does it matter to me? Why does it matter? Because you probably should realize one thing, regardless of what you think about who's president. Now, if you don't like Trump, you're never going to like him. Okay, I get that. And I do think it's probably somewhat of a metaphysical condition. If you just can't stand Donald Trump, you're never going to like anything he does. So if you're in that category, you're in that category. I'm sorry, I can't help you. There's no meds, even with big pharma. I can tell, to numb your anti-Trump stuff. I don't have maybe there's some opioids. I don't know. I don't have any. But you may not know this. The president of the United States is the civilian commander in chief. And I know because I've been around over the years in New Hampshire because we've had our presidential primary. I've been to events at McIntyre ski area, former President George W. Bush. I've seen when Bill Clinton would come up, past presidents, been to the White House. There is, especially when the president travels, there are a few things behind him. And you might just think Secret Service agents. They're all around, but that's not what I'm talking about. There's a team of medical professionals, I don't know if you knew this, that travel with the president. So if President Trump just went to the Middle East, if he's going over here, if Joe Biden was, going to Pennsylvania, I don't know if you know this. I'm just going to tell you something. It's, I think it's pretty cool. And it's not like intel. It's okay to say. There's a doctor and a nurse. There's a medical team that travels with the president and an ambulance in that motorcade. And in that case, because I remember once in the back of the tent when everything's out there, and I just went up and said hi to the doctor and the nurse. I said, I'm just curious. Hi, I'm, just here, watching, covering this. So I'm just curious. And they introduced themselves as the medical professionals with the president. They were very professional. And in that case is a miniature surgical room with the blood type, the blood packets, and even some other things. Heaven forbid or God forbid, the president is shot or a bomb goes off. So they travel with the president. The other thing that travels with the president is a case. They call it the football. It's an actual case. It looks like a small carry-on, heavy-duty plastic type, official type suitcase. It's a case. They call it the football. And in that are launch codes and sequences for our nuclear arsenal. From submarines, from airplanes, air bases, underground. In that case is the football with the sequence codes that needs joint collaboration with like Secretary of Defense and others to launch. That is around the elected president of the United States. So if there's 3 political activists in and around the president who've basically taken over the reelection and the auto pen and what the president did in his whole second term, and the only time it was exposed was the debate in Atlanta. Around them was that same case. Now, it would have taken the president or others to do that, but that's a scary thought. That's why this stuff matters. Who really ran the Biden White House? I asked it for 4 years. I'm asking it now. Jake Tapper's book blows the lid off this. And I'm just wondering, these 3 individuals, these 3 civilian appointees who are he calls it the Politburo, Jake Tapper, the Politburo, which is a communist term, by the way, the Politburo. They took over the Biden White House, the reelection, using race as a reason not to run in the early states like New Hampshire. The issues, the auto pen, the signatures, the pardons, the policies. Isn't that kind of scary to you? It should be. Even though it's come and gone, it should be. But it won't matter if you're politically partisan. Hey, Google, hey, walks away the pulse of an H. Alicia Preston's Anthopoulos, Seacoast Online, next.